It started, as all great suburban dramas do, with a cup of coffee and a mild sense of existential dread. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring out the window at my driveway. A perfectly paved stretch of asphalt that I had paid an ungodly amount for last summer after the HOA sent me one of their infamous passive-aggressive letters about curb appeal. You know the type. Polite font, but dripping with the quiet menace of bureaucratic tyranny. Anyway, there I was, sipping my coffee, when I saw her, Karen. Not just any Karen, the queen bee of our HOA, the self-appointed enforcer of lawn heights and mailbox aesthetics. She was driving her oversized SUV, a vehicle so unnecessarily large it could double as a mobile command center for a small army, straight across my driveway, not slowing down, not waving, just barreling through like she was auditioning for a Fast and Furious spin-off called Suburban Fury. At first I thought, surely this is a one-time thing. Maybe she was late for Pilates or had an emergency at Whole Foods. But no, over the next week, it became clear that Karen had decided my driveway was her personal shortcut to avoid the extra 30 seconds it would take to drive around the cul-de-sac like a normal human being. Every day, like clockwork, her SUV would appear, cutting across my property with all the grace and subtlety of a wrecking ball. Now, I'm not usually one to pick fights with neighbors, especially not ones who have the HOA wrapped around their manicured little finger. But this was war. I started small. A polite note taped to her mailbox. Hi Karen, just a friendly reminder that my driveway is private property. Please refrain from using it as a shortcut. Thanks. The next day, I found the note crumpled up in my recycling bin. Recycling bin. The audacity. Next, I tried talking to her directly. I caught her as she was power walking past my house in her neon pink tracksuit that could probably be seen from space. Hey Karen, I said with what I thought was an approachable smile. I've noticed you've been using my driveway lately. Could you maybe— Oh, don't worry about it, she interrupted, waving me off like I was a waiter trying to sell her dessert. It's just so much faster this way. Yes, I said through gritted teeth. But it's my driveway. Well, she said with a laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard. Technically, everything in this neighborhood is under HOA jurisdiction. That's when I realized two things. One, Karen had no intention of stopping. And two, she might actually believe she owned my driveway by some twisted extension of HOA bylaws. So, naturally, I called the HOA to complain. Big mistake. The HOA board might as well have been renamed the Karen Fan Club. They listened politely as I explained the situation and then hit me with their favorite phrase, "We'll look into it." Translation: We're going to do absolutely nothing because Karen brings gluten-free muffins to every meeting. By now, Karen's daily driveway detours were starting to feel personal. She wasn't just cutting through. She was accelerating as if daring me to do something about it. One morning, she even honked at me while I was taking out the trash, as if I were in her way. That's when I knew it was time to escalate. I spent an entire weekend researching property laws and HOA regulations like a man possessed. Did you know there are actual legal precedents for driveway trespassing? Neither did I, but armed with this newfound knowledge and fueled by an unhealthy amount of caffeine, I drafted a formal complaint complete with photographic evidence of Karen's vehicular escapades. The HOA's response? A form letter thanking me for my concern and reminding me that community harmony is their top priority. Harmony, as if Karen's SUV wasn't tearing through my harmony every single day. Fine. If the HOA wouldn't help me, I'd help myself. That's when inspiration struck. If Karen wanted to treat my driveway like her personal racetrack, why not give her something to race through? Something challenging. The idea came to me while pruning my hedges, a task I'd been neglecting ever since Karen started monopolizing all my mental energy. What if those hedges weren't just decorative? What if they were strategic? And so began Project Hedge Maze. I spent weeks secretly transforming my driveway into a labyrinthine masterpiece worthy of a Greek mythological hero, or at least someone with GPS and a lot of patience. Every night after work, under cover of darkness and mosquito bites, I planted rows upon rows of shrubs in intricate patterns designed to confuse even the most determined shortcut seeker. By the time I finished, my once straightforward driveway had become an impenetrable fortress of greenery. There were dead ends, false turns, and one particularly devious section that looped back on itself like some kind of botanical Mobius strip. The piece de resistance? A sign at the entrance that read, "Welcome to John's Hedge Maze. Admission, $5, Karen pays double." The next morning, coffee in hand, I waited by the window for Karen's grand arrival. She didn't disappoint. Her SUV rounded the corner at its usual breakneck speed, and then screeched to a halt as she encountered what could only be described as horticultural chaos. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the maze in disbelief. Then she got out of her car, wearing heels no less, and started yelling something about property values and lawsuits. I couldn't hear her over the sound of my own laughter. Karen eventually gave up and drove around the cul-de-sac like everyone else. A small but satisfying victory in our ongoing suburban saga. And me? Well, let's just say my mornings have been infinitely more peaceful since then. Plus, the maze has become something of a local attraction. Kids love running through it after school, and one neighbor even asked if he could host his kid's birthday party there. As for Karen, she hasn't spoken to me since, but every time I see her glaring at me from across the street during HOA meetings, I can't help but smile. Revenge may be petty, but oh boy is it satisfying. After the hedge maze debacle, I thought I had seen the last of Karen's SUV on my driveway. I mean, who in their right mind would look at a labyrinth of shrubs and think, yes, this is still my shortcut? But Karen, as it turns out, is not just anyone. She's the kind of person who sees a do not enter sign as a personal challenge and a hedge maze as an inconvenient obstacle to her God-given right to cut corners, literally and figuratively. It started with the honking. Loud, insistent honking. Every morning at precisely 7:15 a.m., Karen would pull up to the entrance of the maze and lay on her horn like she was auditioning for a role in Mad Max Suburban Edition. The first time it happened, I thought maybe she was trying to scare off a squirrel or alert me to some kind of emergency. But no, this was Karen's way of expressing her displeasure with my landscaping choices. I ignored her at first. What's a little honking compared to the satisfaction of knowing she couldn't use my driveway anymore? But Karen doesn't do subtlety, and she certainly doesn't do defeat. When the honking failed to elicit a response, she escalated. One morning, I woke up to find a handwritten note taped to my front door. It read, "Your hedge maze is a violation of HOA regulations. Remove it immediately or face consequences." Consequences? What was she going to do? Call the hedge police? I laughed and tossed the note in the recycling bin. A poetic choice, given her previous disregard for my polite driveway reminder. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next week, she launched what can only be described as a one-woman campaign against my maze. First came the complaints to the HOA. She accused me of creating an eyesore and endangering community safety. Apparently, my maze was so confusing that it posed a risk to unsuspecting pedestrians who might accidentally wander into it and never find their way out. The HOA sent me another one of their passive-aggressive letters, this time with slightly less polite font, asking me to consider alternative landscaping solutions. I responded with photographic evidence of Karen's trespassing and a detailed explanation of how my maze was technically within all property guidelines. The HOA didn't reply, which I took as a silent acknowledgement that they were tired of both me and Karen. Next came the sabotage attempts. One morning, I found several sections of my hedge maze mysteriously flattened, as if someone had driven over them with an SUV that was far too large for its own good. Coincidence? I think not. But instead of getting mad, I got creative. Using some leftover garden supplies and an unhealthy amount of duct tape, I reinforced the damaged sections with stakes and chicken wire. The next time Karen tried her vehicular vandalism routine, she ended up with scratches on her bumper and no further progress into my maze. By now, Karen's feud with me had become something of a neighborhood spectacle. People started stopping by just to admire the maze and ask questions about its origin story. One neighbor even suggested I install security cameras so we could catch Karen in the act and post the footage online. Tempting as it was, I decided against it. After all, revenge is best served green, and preferably without legal complications. But Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting reality itself. One day, she showed up at my house with what can only be described as her version of reinforcements. 2 HOA board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but standing on my front porch. "John," Karen said in her most condescending tone, "we need to talk about your hedge maze." "Oh," I said innocently. "Is there a problem?" "It's obstructive," she snapped. "And frankly, it's ridiculous. I think it's charming." One of the board members muttered under his breath before Karen shot him a death glare. "Look," she continued, "we're giving you one last chance to remove it voluntarily before we take legal action." "Legal action?" I repeated, struggling not to laugh. "Over some shrubs?" Karen crossed her arms like she was about to deliver a TED Talk on suburban justice. "This is about community standards. And this," I said, gesturing dramatically toward the maze, "is about personal property rights." The standoff lasted about 30 seconds before one of the board members sighed and said they'd review the situation further. Translation: they were going to go home and pretend this conversation never happened. Karen stormed off in a huff, but not before muttering something about how this isn't over. And you know what? She was right. The next morning, I woke up to find an orange traffic cone placed at the entrance to my driveway with a handwritten sign taped to it that read, "Private property of HOA." Apparently, Karen had decided that if she couldn't use my driveway as her shortcut, no one could use it at all, including me. I stared at the cone for a solid minute before bursting into laughter so loud that my neighbor across the street came out to see what was going on. "Karen?" he asked knowingly. "Karen," I confirmed. "You should charge admission for this drama," he said before heading back inside. Inspired by his suggestion and fueled by equal parts spite and caffeine, I decided it was time for another upgrade to my maze. Using some leftover Halloween decorations, don't ask why I have so many fake skeletons, I added new features designed specifically for Karen's benefit. Motion-activated lights that spelled out "Keep Out" in blinking letters and strategically placed signs that read things like "Warning," "Minotaur ahead," and "Exit not guaranteed." The next time Karen pulled up to my driveway honking like an enraged goose, she was met with flashing lights and ominous warnings about mythical creatures lurking within the shrubbery. She didn't get out of her car or honk again. By now, even the HOA seemed tired of Karen's antics. At their next meeting, which I attended purely out of spite, they announced new guidelines for driveway usage that included explicit language about respecting private property boundaries. Karen tried to argue that these rules were unnecessary because no one else has ever complained. But her argument fell flat when several neighbors chimed in about their own experiences with her boundary-pushing behavior. In short, Karen lost, and while she didn't admit defeat outright, Karens never do, she stopped using my driveway entirely after that meeting. As for me, my mornings are quieter now. No honking SUVs or passive-aggressive notes taped to my door, but every time I walk past my hedge maze on the way to work, I smile knowing it stands as both a monument to suburban pettiness and proof that sometimes revenge really is worth it. By the time Karen stopped using my driveway, I thought I'd finally won. The maze was intact. The HOA had begrudgingly acknowledged my right to defend my property, and Karen's SUV was no longer terrorizing my asphalt. I should have felt triumphant, victorious, like a suburban Napoleon surveying his empire of hedges. But no, Karen wasn't done. Because Karen isn't just a person. She's a force of nature, like a tornado or a really bad reality TV show. And just like those things, she has a way of making everything worse before you can catch your breath. The first sign that Karen was plotting her next move came in the form of a delivery truck. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was enjoying my coffee while admiring the maze from my window, as one does when their landscaping doubles as a fortress. Suddenly, this massive truck pulled up to Karen's house and started unloading what looked like industrial-grade gardening equipment. We're talking hedge trimmers, chainsaws, and something that suspiciously resembled a flamethrower. Now, I'm not saying Karen bought an arsenal specifically to wage war on my maze, but let's be honest. This is Karen we're talking about. Subtlety isn't exactly her strong suit. Sure enough, by the end of the week, Karen had transformed her front yard into what can only be described as an anti-maze propaganda zone. She installed perfectly symmetrical flower beds, a fountain shaped like an eagle, because nothing says, "I'm better than you," like patriotic lawn decor, and, wait for it, a sign that read, "Real landscaping here," with an arrow pointing directly at her house. I'll admit it, I laughed, out loud, for several minutes. But Karen's passive-aggressive landscaping wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about sending a message, and that message was clear: "I'm coming for your maze." First, I tried to ignore her antics. After all, it wasn't like she could legally touch my property without risking another HOA intervention. And after the last meeting, even Karen knew she couldn't count on them to back her up again. But then came the flyers. Yes, flyers. One morning, as I was heading out to work, I found a stack of neon-colored papers stuffed into my mailbox and taped to my front door. They read, "Join the movement to restore community standards. Say no to mazes." Below that was a picture of my driveway with the maze photoshopped to look like it was on fire. Dramatic much? And a call to action urging neighbors to sign a petition demanding its removal. Now, I don't know what's more ridiculous: the fact that Karen thought anyone would care enough to join her anti-maze crusade, or the fact that she went full graphic design mode for this campaign. Either way, I decided it was time to escalate. Enter Phase 2 of Project Hedge Maze, the expansion. If Karen wanted to make my maze the talk of the neighborhood, fine. I'd give her something worth talking about. Over the next few weeks, I added new sections to the maze, transforming it from a simple driveway obstacle into a sprawling labyrinth that extended into my backyard. There were twists and turns, dead ends with humorous signs, "Wrong way, try again," and even a small gazebo in the center for anyone brave enough to find their way through. Of course, this didn't go unnoticed by Karen or the HOA. At their next meeting, which I attended purely out of spite, Karen showed up with her petition in hand and demanded immediate action against what she called an eyesore of epic proportions. She claimed the maze violated multiple HOA regulations, including rules about excessive landscaping and unauthorized structures. I calmly presented my case. Every shrub was planted within property boundaries. The gazebo was temporary and therefore exempt from HOA approval. And most importantly, there were no official rules against mazes, at least not yet. The HOA board members looked exhausted. One of them actually muttered under his breath, "Why do we live here?" before reluctantly agreeing to review both sides of the argument at their next meeting. Karen wasn't happy with this non-decision, and when Karen isn't happy, everyone suffers. Over the next few days, she ramped up her campaign against me with all the fervor of someone who's never been told no. She started hosting impromptu neighborhood gatherings on her lawn, complete with snacks and folding chairs, where she'd rant about how my maze was ruining property values and attracting undesirable elements. What kind of undesirable elements? She never specified, but judging by her tone, you'd think I was running an underground hedge maze cartel. Meanwhile, I doubled down on making my maze as absurdly delightful as possible. I added solar-powered lights for nighttime navigation, installed speakers that played whimsical music, Flight of the Bumblebee, Naturally, and even hired a local artist to paint murals on some of the gazebo walls depict famous labyrinths from mythology. If Karen wanted drama, she'd get it, just not in the way she expected. By now, word had spread beyond our cul-de-sac about the feud between me and Karen. People from other neighborhoods started stopping by to see what all the fuss was about. And let me tell you, nothing irritates Karen more than strangers admiring something she hates. One Saturday afternoon, as I was giving an impromptu tour of the maze to some curious visitors, including 2 kids who insisted on timing themselves as they raced through, Karen stormed over with an expression so furious it could curdle milk. "This is unacceptable," she shouted loud enough for everyone within a 3-block radius to hear. "You're turning this neighborhood into a circus." Actually, one of the kids piped up cheerfully, "It's more like an amusement park." Karen glared at him like he'd personally insulted her eagle fountain before turning back to me. "This ends now," she hissed through gritted teeth. "Karen," I said calmly, because nothing infuriates her more than calmness. "The only thing ending here is your credibility." She stomped off in defeat, or so I thought. That evening, as I was unwinding with a glass of wine in my gazebo, because why not enjoy your own masterpiece, I heard rustling in one of the maze's outer sections. At first, I thought it might be raccoons or squirrels, but then came the unmistakable sound of snapping branches. Karen had entered the maze, armed with what appeared to be pruning shears and sheer determination fueled by rage and possibly Chardonnay. She hacked her way through one section after another like some kind of suburban Indiana Jones on a misguided quest for vengeance. But here's the thing about mazes. They're designed to confuse, and mine was particularly effective at disorienting anyone who didn't know its layout, which is everyone except me. By the time Karen reached what she thought was an exit, but turned out to be another dead end labeled, "Oops, wrong turn," she let out an exasperated scream loud enough to wake half the neighborhood. And me? Well, let's just say watching Karen get lost in my masterpiece might have been one of the most satisfying moments of my life so far. Karen's scream echoed through the neighborhood like some kind of suburban mating call, and I couldn't help but chuckle as I sat in my gazebo, sipping my wine and enjoying the show. There she was, flailing around in my hedge maze, pruning shears in hand, looking like a deranged Edward Scissorhands who had lost his map. It was poetic, really. The queen of the HOA, reduced to a mere mortal, trapped in the very labyrinth she had tried so hard to destroy. I debated whether or not to intervene. On the one hand, it was wildly entertaining to see Karen stumble into dead end after dead end, muttering curses under her breath that would make a sailor blush. On the other hand, I didn't want her to actually damage my masterpiece, or worse, somehow escape and claim victory. So, I decided to do what any responsible maze owner would do. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured into the shrubbery. "Karen," I called out in my most innocent voice. "Is everything okay? Get me out of here," she screeched. "This is harassment. This is illegal. This is amazing," I offered helpfully. "I know, right? The craftsmanship is impeccable. Don't patronize me," she snapped. "I demand you show me the way out." "Of course," I said, shining my flashlight dramatically like I was leading an archaeological expedition. "Just follow me." Now, let me be clear. I could have taken Karen directly to the exit, but where's the fun in that? Instead, I led her on a scenic tour of the maze, pointing out all the highlights along the way. "This section here," I said, gesturing to a particularly dense cluster of hedges, "is modeled after the famous labyrinth of Crete, where Theseus fought the Minotaur. Fun fact, no Minotaurs here, just Karen." "Very funny," she growled. "And over here," I continued cheerfully, ignoring her tone, "we have the dead end of shame. It's where people who don't respect private property usually end up." Karen glared at me with such intensity that I half expected her to set the hedges on fire with her mind. But she said nothing, probably because she was too busy trying to figure out if she could legally sue me for emotional distress. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of passive-aggressive commentary from both sides, we reached the exit. Karen stumbled out onto my driveway, looking disheveled and defeated. Her once perfect hair was now a tangle of leaves and twigs, and her neon tracksuit had seen better days. "There you go," I said with a smile. "Safe and sound. This isn't over," she hissed before storming off toward her house. And you know what? For once, she was right. The next day, I received an official letter from Karen's lawyer, or rather, someone who claimed to be her lawyer but whose letterhead looked suspiciously homemade. The letter accused me of emotional damages, public humiliation, and, my personal favorite, creating a hazardous environment with malicious intent. It demanded that I remove the maze immediately or face legal action. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. But just to be safe, I decided to consult an actual lawyer, a friend of mine named Dave who specializes in property disputes and who also happens to love hedge mazes. After reviewing Karen's letter and taking a quick tour of my labyrinthine masterpiece, Dave assured me that I was well within my rights. "In fact," he said with a grin, "you could probably countersue for trespassing if you really wanted to." Tempting as it was to take Karen to court just for the satisfaction of seeing her squirm in front of a judge, I decided against it. After all, this wasn't about money or legal victories, it was about principle. And besides, Karen had already lost in the court of public opinion. By now, Word of our feud had spread far beyond our little HOA community. My hedge maze had become something of a local attraction, drawing visitors from neighboring towns who wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Kids loved racing through it. Parents loved taking pictures. Even dogs seemed to enjoy sniffing around its many twists and turns. Karen hated every second of it. She tried everything to shut me down. More complaints to the HOA? Ignored. More flyers? Laughed at. Even an attempt to rally other neighbors against me? Unsuccessful. But no matter what she did, it only seemed to make people love the maze even more. One day, as I was trimming some overgrown branches near the entrance, a reporter from the local newspaper showed up at my door. "Is it true," she asked breathlessly, "that your hedge maze is at the center of a neighborhood feud?" "Well," I said with a grin, "I wouldn't call it a feud. It's more like creative differences." The article ran in the Sunday edition under the headline, *Suburban Showdown. Man versus HOA Queen in Epic Hedge Maze Battle. It included quotes from both me, "It's just a fun landscaping project," and Karen, "This is an affront to community standards," as well as several glowing testimonials from neighbors who described my maze as a work of art and way better than Karen's tacky eagle fountain. By Monday morning, Karen had officially lost whatever shred of credibility she had left. People stopped taking her seriously at HOA meetings. Kids started calling her the Maze Lady. Even her beloved eagle fountain became a running joke among neighbors. Does it squawk when you walk by? And me? Well, let's just say life has been pretty peaceful ever since. The maze still stands tall and proud, a testament to creativity, perseverance, and just a little bit of spite. It's hosted birthday parties, scavenger hunts, and even a marriage proposal. The couple got engaged in front of the gazebo. They said it was magical. And every time I walk through its winding paths or hear kids laughing as they race through its twists and turns, I can't help but smile. As for Karen, she eventually sold her house and moved away. Rumor has it she couldn't handle being known as the woman who lost to a hedge maze. Wherever she is now, I hope she's found peace, or at least a driveway she can call her own. And that's how one man's petty revenge turned into a neighborhood legend. Moral of the story? Don't mess with someone who has time on their hands and access to gardening supplies. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some new ideas for maze expansions that involve topiary dinosaurs. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story about suburban warfare and botanical justice, don't forget to like this post, share it with your friends, especially anyone dealing with their own HOA drama, and leave a comment below. Have you ever had a feud with your neighbors? Tell me all about it. I promise not to judge much,